When Abraham was still just a thin little boy living in a house filled with the smell of smoke and wood dust, no one knew that one day he would become the forefather of nations. Back then, he simply watched his father carve wooden and stone idols, polish them, paint eyes on them, and place them on shelves for people to buy and kneel before. The whole neighborhood grew crowded during festivals, people carrying incense and offerings, eyes tightly shut in front of lifeless faces, while Abraham stood quietly in a corner, staring at those painted stone eyes, with a strange tightening in his chest, as if something inside him refused to accept what everyone else believed. Since he was small, he had heard his father say these idols would protect their family. But the older he grew, the clearer it became that these figures never moved, never answered, never breathed. Even when they fell and broke, legs snapped, faces cracked, people simply glued them back together, painted over the damage, then returned to bowing down as if nothing had happened. Many nights, Abraham lay on the roof, staring at the sky, listening to chants rise from the streets below, wondering how a creator capable of scattering countless stars across the heavens could possibly reside inside a chunk of wood bought from the marketplace. He dared not speak this aloud, knowing one careless word could be seen as an unforgivable insult to the gods. Yet the more he kept silent, the more it hurt, as if he were betraying a truth buried deep in his soul. Eventually, Abraham realized that he could pretend to nod along. He could help his father carry those heavy statues. He could smile politely at customers. But he could not lie to his own heart and call those lifeless carvings divine. All of us, at some point in our lives, have faced a moment like Abraham's, when the crowd believes one thing, yet something inside whispers another. Most people choose to remain silent. Abraham did not. He chose to stand with that small, persistent voice inside him. And from that quiet conflict, the seed of a destiny was planted. From the moment a young boy dared to be honest with his own soul, the story of a man chosen to speak with heaven truly began. That night, the whole neighborhood was shaken awake by a loud explosion from Terah's house. Flames burst upward, red and furious, as if they wanted to swallow the entire sky. People came running, some carrying buckets of water, others shouting for help. But in the middle of all that chaos, Abraham stood completely still, as if his feet had taken root in the ground. He did not cry. He did not panic. He simply watched the idols his father had carved burn away one by one, collapsing like rotten trunks struck down by a storm. To everyone else, the fire was a disaster, a bad omen, a punishment from the gods they believed in. But inside Abraham, something else was stirring, something quiet, something long suppressed, like an invisible hand was slowly untying the knots in his chest and fanning a truth he had been afraid to face. When the flames reflected off his face, Abraham wasn't just witnessing the destruction of a house. He was witnessing the unraveling of his entire life and the start of a path he never thought he would walk. He saw the idols his father had poured years of effort into, the same objects the villagers bowed to with reverence, now reduced to nothing but ash. And when the tallest pillars of fire finally collapsed, Abraham whispered a sentence even he did not fully understand. Sometimes, fire does not come to punish, but to guide. Perhaps it was because he sensed, somewhere deep inside, that this fire carried a message. Much like the old stories he had heard while growing up, The kind that said when life pushes you to the edge, it may be a sign that you are meant to cross into another shore. His father trembled as he picked up charred fragments of statues, but Abraham looked past him and saw a road stretching endlessly forward. Yes, there was fear in his young heart, the fear of losing a home, the fear of not knowing where life would lead him next. But beneath that fear was a strange, steady intuition that he had just been burned free from everything that once held him back. As the flames dimmed and the night settled again, Abraham understood that it was time to seek something greater, something real, something far beyond the idols his village worshipped. And if this was the voice of heaven calling him, then the fire that night was the very first answer. One afternoon, after the fire, Abraham sat alone on the hillside behind his home. The wind brushed through the dry leaves, sounding almost like whispers from someone unseen, while his heart remained tangled in questions he still could not put into words. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once carried heavy wooden idols, yet could not answer the simple question of where his life truly belonged. In that moment, the air around him suddenly stilled, as if time itself paused for a breath. A thin ray of light, soft as morning mist yet clear enough to stop him cold, appeared right before his eyes. It was not the glow of fire, nor the harsh light of the sun, but something entirely different, a kind of radiance that made a human heart want to kneel and flee at the same time. From within that light, a figure emerged, not quite human, yet nothing else could describe it. Its face carried a strange, calming peace, and its eyes were so clear, Abraham felt as if every hidden thought inside him had been unveiled. Before he could ask anything, the being spoke, softly, steadily, calling his name. Not a syllable off, not a moment of hesitation, as though his name had been kept safe in a memory far older than the world itself. A chill ran down Abraham's spine, not out of fear, but out of the overwhelming feeling of being seen completely. His whole life, he had felt different from those around him, burdened by questions no one answered, torn between what people believed and what his own heart whispered. And with that single call of his name, he knew he had never been alone. The angel Yahuel told him that heaven had heard every quiet struggle in his heart since he was a child. The nights he stared at the sky, wondering if there was a truth greater than the idols decaying before him. Yahuel did not come to force him into faith. He came to affirm it, to tell Abraham that his doubts, his longing, his sleepless nights were never meaningless. When the angel placed a hand on his shoulder, light as touching an old sadness, Abraham understood that his life could never return to what it once was. Because when heaven calls a person by name, the path ahead is no longer a choice. It becomes destiny. That evening, the sky suddenly turned a cold shade of gray, and the wind swept across the grasslands with a strange heaviness that made Abraham's spine tighten. Yahuel's voice still echoed faintly in his mind, yet a hollow feeling began to rise inside him, as if behind every gentle light there was always a shadow waiting for its moment. As Abraham walked down into the valley, the air grew thicker, every breath heavier than the last. Then, from behind a large stone, a dry scraping sound broke the silence, a sound that didn't belong to anything of this world. Abraham turned, and he saw it, a shape that felt both familiar and alien. half like a creature that crawls, half like a nightmare wearing burnt wings. It was not human, but not entirely beast either. Its eyes glowed like smoldering coal, staring into him with a gaze that made the human heart tremble by instinct alone. The angel had called it Azazel, the one who had once fallen from the light and now wandered in darkness like a wound that could never heal. But in that moment, Abraham did not see a demon. He saw something that looked like pain twisted into hatred. By instinct, he stepped back, yet his feet felt glued to the earth. Azazel moved closer, its voice rough and broken, speaking words that made Abraham freeze, because it struck directly at the deepest doubts inside him. It whispered that no one truly understood him, that the path he walked was too lonely, too dangerous, too different from everything the world expected. It did not roar. It did not attack. It simply spoke with a voice that sounded almost like comfort. And that was the terrifying part. Evil does not always come with claws and teeth. Sometimes it comes disguised as empathy, choosing the perfect moment and the perfect wound to whisper into. Abraham wavered. For a single breath, he understood why humans fall, because darkness knows exactly where the heart is weakest. But then he remembered the light that had spoken his name, the peace in Yahuel's voice, the feeling of being seen without being judged. When Azazel reached out to touch him, Abraham jerked back as if waking from a spell. With a long, steady breath, he said no, not with force, but with the voice of someone who finally chooses the truth within his own soul. A distant light burst suddenly, forcing Azazel to recoil, furious but helpless. And in that moment, Abraham realized that evil is not only something outside, but also the trembling moments within ourselves. And as long as he remembered who he was, the darkness could never claim him. That morning, Abraham woke with a strange feeling, as if someone were calling him from a place human eyes could never see. The angel Yahuel stood on the hillside, the light around him soft like mist dissolving into the dawn. He told Abraham that the time had come to perform the sacrifice, not to please some distant god, but to free Abraham's own heart from the last pieces of fear still clinging to it. Hearing that, Abraham felt his chest tighten. A sacrifice was never just a ritual. It was a test of the soul, a moment when a person must stand face to face with everything they had been avoiding. As he prepared the offerings, his hands trembled, not from fear of blood or fire, but from knowing that beyond this point, his life would never return to what it was. Each step he took across the dusty ground sounded like his own heartbeat knocking on the truth. When the altar was raised in the middle of the valley, the wind swept across the field, shaking the grass, as if all of nature were holding its breath. Abraham laid each offering down carefully, following Yahuel's instructions, his heart surging with a mix of worry, sorrow, and gratitude for finally finding a path he was willing to walk. When he lit the fire, the flame didn't roar upward. It spread slowly, steadily, glowing like a lamp held by someone searching for themselves. And then, something extraordinary happened. The sky above the altar shifted into a deep, unfathomable blue, as though an invisible door had been gently opened. From that space, a white light descended, not hot like fire, but warm like the embrace of someone who understands every corner of your heart. Standing in that light, Abraham felt as if his soul were being washed clean. His doubts, his guilt, his fears dissolved one by one. There was no thunder, no shaken earth, only a peace so profound it made him want to cry. In that moment, he understood. The sacrifice was not proof of his worthiness, but a reminder that heaven had never taken its eyes off him. And as the light slowly withdrew, the sky closing again, like a gentle door being shut, Abraham knew he had stepped into a new chapter of his life, one where the heavens no longer felt so far away. When the sacrifice finally ended, Abraham stood quietly in the empty valley, his heart still trembling from the light that had just touched his soul. The wind drifted down from the distant mountains, carrying with it the cold breath of early morning, making him feel as though the entire world was sinking into a deep, sacred stillness. Then suddenly, the air around him changed, becoming so light that Abraham felt as if he were standing on the surface of water. The familiar light appeared again, this time not as brilliant as before, but soft like the thin blue smoke curling from the kitchens of old village homes. The angel Yahweh looked at him with gentle eyes so deep they made a human heart feel small and humble. Without a single word, Yahweh placed a hand on Abraham's shoulder, a touch so warm it felt like touching an old memory lodged inside his chest. And then Abraham felt his body lifting, not pushed by wind nor carried by visible wings, but raised by an unseen force that pulled him from the earth as lightly as a breath. Below him, the valley slowly shrank. Rocks, grass, and dirt paths all turned into tiny dots scattered on a canvas. The higher he rose, the lighter Abraham's heart became, as though every burden he had carried for years was being unclasped one knot at a time. He could hear below him the sounds of life, voices, worries, the weight of everyday things. But above him stretched a sky so wide and open, it reminded him of his childhood, running through windy fields with nothing to fear. When he reached the first layer of heaven, he heard something strange, a sound that was neither singing nor music. It felt like the breathing of the universe, steady, warm, comforting enough to make a person want to close their eyes and rest. He saw streams of light moving like heavenly silk ribbons, soft and pure, inviting silence, inviting awe. For the first time, Abraham felt he was not merely a small man living on the earth, but a part of something infinitely larger. Something vast, yet familiar, powerful, yet gentle, like a mother's hand resting on her child's forehead at night. And when the journey through the sky finally paused, Abraham understood that he had been lifted not to witness wonders, but to learn something deeper. From this moment on, he would never walk alone, because even when no one could see them, there were wings, silent, invisible wings, that would always lift him in the moments he felt most fragile. When the journey through the heavens finally paused, Abraham felt a strange silence settle around him, like the brief moment between two heartbeats, when the entire world seems to hold its breath, waiting for something sacred to emerge. Before him stretched an expanse so vast it made him feel like a single grain of dust drifting inside an endless tapestry of the universe. The light in that place was unlike any light he had ever seen. Not blinding, not fading, but a kind of radiance that made the soul tremble, as if it were being called by its true name from the very beginning of time. And then the throne appeared, not adorned with gold or jewels as people often imagine, but with a majesty that could not be described by human language, a presence so real so overwhelming that anyone who beheld it would feel the instinctive urge to bow. Abraham felt his legs weaken. His throat tightened as if an invisible hand rested upon his chest, urging him to confront the deepest place within himself. He realized that this light was no longer the gentle glow of an angel, but the very presence of the Creator, the one who had seen every step he had taken, every tear he had shed, every quiet doubt that had lived in his heart since he was a child. In that radiance, Abraham saw himself again, saw the moments he had been afraid, the moments he had faltered, the moments he could have given up. But what surprised him was not that these weaknesses were exposed, but that they were met with acceptance. Not judgment, not rejection, acceptance. He felt seen the way a human longs to be seen, fully, with every crack and scar included. Then a voice rose, not loud, yet filling the entire expanse like the whisper of earth and sky merging into one. The voice told him that he had been chosen, not because he was strong or flawless, but because he had dared to seek truth. Because he had held onto a fragile spark of faith, even when the rest of the world had gone cold. Abraham fell to his knees, his shoulders shaking, not from fear, but from emotion. To stand before the throne of the one who cannot be named, to be heard, to be entrusted with a destiny. This was a grace far beyond anything a human mind could understand. And in that moment, he knew his life no longer belonged to himself. It now belonged to the light. In the moment when the light around the throne softened, a vast expanse opened before Abraham's eyes, so immense that his heart tightened in awe. It was not the sky, nor the earth, but a kind of cosmic canvas, where time itself stretched thin and clear, like the surface of a lake at dawn. Yahweh stood beside him, his gaze solemn yet filled with compassion, and gently told Abraham to look closely, because what he was about to see was not merely the story of one people, but the story of all humanity, from the beginning to the very last day. When Abraham looked into that boundless vision, he saw tiny shafts of light, like golden dust, moving and gathering, then scattering again, like the heartbeat of the world. Each light was a human life, a choice, a moment. He saw Adam and Eve standing by the tree, saw the first time humanity tasted fear, confusion, and the desire to become like the one who created them. He saw countless generations moving through history, some building, some destroying, some raising weapons out of wounded pride, others weeping quietly by the fire because they had hurt the ones they loved most. Nothing was chaotic. Everything flowed together like a vast river, carrying both light and shadow. What moved Abraham the most was not humanity's sin, but a moments they struggled to rise after falling. He saw mothers clutching their children while fleeing through the night, still lifting their eyes to the sky in search of hope. He saw fathers who had nothing left, yet still tried to smile so their children would feel safe. He saw young people standing in the center of chaos, choosing what was right even when it cost them dearly. And he understood. Humanity was not created only to face darkness, but to kindle light wherever they stood. In this cosmic tapestry, good and evil didn't sit at opposite ends. They intertwined within every heart, and each small choice tipped the balance of the world in one direction or the other. As the vision slowly faded, Abraham felt a warmth spreading through his chest, as if he had glimpsed the truth humanity had searched for over countless generations. that the story of mankind is not simply one of wars and wrongdoing, but a long journey in which each soul learns, step by step, how to rediscover the light within itself. As the cosmic vision faded, Abraham suddenly saw in the distance a garden so green it softened the heart, beautiful in the way children imagine the world when listening to bedtime stories from their grandmother. In the center of that garden, he saw the first two humans, Adam and Eve, sitting together in the shade of a great tree. They did not look majestic or godlike, as people often imagine, but gentle and familiar, like a young couple just stepping into life, filled with wonder, yet unsure of the vast world around them. Abraham watched them for a long time, and then he witnessed the moment everything changed. It was not loud or dramatic. It was only a single fragile moment when doubt slipped into Eve's eyes, then drifted toward Adam like a thin mist. A moment when they wondered whether the one who created them might be holding back something even better. Just that one question, and the story of humanity shifted into a different river. He saw them walk away in silence, their faces heavy with regret, and the sky above dimmed, as if the universe itself mourned the loss of something pure. But what struck Abraham the most was the familiarity of the emotion reflected in their eyes. It was a deeply human kind of fear, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being left behind, the fear that love might disappear without warning. And he understood. The first sin did not begin with rebellion. It began with insecurity, the kind that sits quietly in every human heart. An insecurity that has followed humanity until this very day, prompting people to speak hurtful words, to fight meaningless battles, to spend their lives doubting whether they were ever worthy of love. In the thin light of the vision, Abraham heard what felt like a sigh from the heavens. Not anger, sorrow. Sorrow that a single crack in the human heart had grown into a story that would stretch across thousands of years. And as the images of Adam and Eve faded into the distance, Abraham felt as if he were looking at the shadow of humanity itself. Always fragile, always searching, yet never losing the longing to return to the original light from which it came. As the vision continued to unfold, Abraham saw the sky before him darken. Not the ordinary darkness of night, but a heavy, foreboding shadow, as if the heavens themselves were sending a distant warning. Yahweh looked at him with eyes both sorrowful and resolute, and said that before a new light could be born, the world must pass through 10 trials, just as a human heart must break once, deeply, before it can find the courage to rise again. As his words faded, Abraham saw the first plague descend, flames swallowing peaceful villages, leaving behind the cries of families who had lost their homes. The second plague came as disease, striking down animals as if they had been cursed, plunging whole regions into despair. The third was famine, fields cracking open under the sun, parents giving up their own food for their children, yet still unable to fill their little stomachs, faces hollowed by too many sleepless nights. Then came hail, cold and sharp like needles, falling onto rooftops, destroying crops, forcing people to huddle together in dark corners, praying desperately for a gentler tomorrow. The fifth plague brought wild beasts fleeing their dens, crossing fields in search of food, spreading fear with every step. The sixth was unexpected snow blanketing lands unaccustomed to winter, freezing life into stillness. so fragile it felt like the final breath of a suffering world. The seventh plague was war. The clash of metal echoing like the earth crying out, as people turned against each other over anger they could no longer swallow. The eighth plague was confusion, an invisible fear seeping into every home, weakening even the strongest hearts. The ninth was separation. Families scattered in every direction, some running toward the mountains, others hiding on woodland edges, praying simply to keep each other alive through the storm. And the 10th plague was trembling, the earth splitting open with a roar, like the voice of the universe itself, reminding humanity that everything they cling to can vanish in a single breath. When the vision finally closed, Abraham felt as though he were carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. Yet in the midst of all that chaos, he saw a thin thread of light, a faint glow like a fisherman's lantern drifting across a night sea. Yahuel told him that faint glow was hope. For only after the deepest darkness does dawn rise within the human heart. The vision shifted into a deep crimson, like the sky before a great storm, and Abraham knew he was about to witness the most heartbreaking scene heaven intended for him to see. Before him, Jerusalem appeared, not as a distant ancient city, but as a homeland anyone could yearn for. A place where children's laughter filled the alleys, where evening smoke rose gently from humble rooftops, where the faith of an entire people had been carried from generation to generation like a sacred flame. But then the sky over Jerusalem darkened, as if a massive hand had covered the sun. From all four sides, enemies surged toward the city like a flood. The clashing of armor echoed like stones rolling down a mountainside. People ran in panic, clutching their children, their elderly parents, searching desperately for safety, but every step was heavy with fear. Abraham saw the city gates shattered, saw flames erupt along familiar streets, saw soldiers storm through the holy temple, as though they had no idea they were trampling the heart of an entire nation. He saw a father kneel in the middle of the chaos, holding his crying child tightly, unsure how to protect him when the world around them was collapsing. He saw mothers running through the smoke, one hand pulling their children forward, the other covering their little eyes from the horror unfolding in front of them. Each of these images pierced Abraham's heart like a thorn, making it hard for him even to breathe. And then he saw the temple burning. The fire didn't just consume wood and stone. It devoured the hope that had been built from countless prayers. Abraham lifted his hand as if to stop it, but his fingers touched only empty air, helpless, like someone watching their homeland crumble from afar, with no way to return. In the trembling light of the vision, Abraham felt the collective pain of a nation pouring down like rain, cries for help mixing with the roar of flames and the footsteps of those fleeing for their lives. Yet what weighed heaviest on his heart was not the destruction itself, but the realization that even the holiest city can fall when its people forget the light that once guided their first steps. As the vision of Jerusalem faded, like evening smoke dissolving into the sky, Abraham stood still, trembling like someone who had just lost both his homeland and his future in a single breath. Tears gathered in his eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of sorrow carried by the people he had just witnessed struggling in chaos. He looked at Yahuel, then lifted his gaze toward the sky, slowly brightening again. And in that fragile moment, a question rose from the deepest part of his heart. A question every human being, across every age and every land, has whispered at least once in their life. Why must those who love deeply, who have done nothing wrong, suffer so much pain? Abraham did not shout it. His voice trembled softly, like a child asking his father why the world is so unfair. He asked why his people were allowed to wander lost, why the temple burned down, why the innocent had to endure cruelty beyond what any soul deserved. Each question was a wound opening, revealing the tender vulnerability of a human heart facing a destiny too heavy to understand. Yahoel remained silent. The angel's eyes held no judgment, no impatience, only the quiet sadness of someone who had witnessed too many sorrows to offer simple comfort. Then a warm light enveloped Abraham, a warmth that made him want to lean into it and cry like a child. And from within that light came the voice of the Creator, not loud, yet filled with power, like the deep echo of the earth speaking. He said that human suffering is never forgotten. Every tear that falls is seen. Every sigh is held gently within the heart of heaven. He said that there are things the human mind cannot yet grasp because they belong to a plan wider, deeper, and longer than a single lifetime. Humans see only the loss before them, but heaven sees the path that leads through loss to renewal. Humans see destruction, but heaven sees the strength that will rise after they walk through the darkness. Abraham bowed his head, and tears fell like the first rain of a new season. He understood then that pain is not an ending, but a doorway into something greater. And in that moment, he realized that the question he had spoken was the question of all humanity, and heaven's answer had always been love, whether people recognized it or not. After the vision surged through him, like a river carrying the whole weight of human history, Abraham stood quietly within the soft light spreading before his eyes. It was not a blinding radiance, but something gentle, like the surface of a lake at dawn, like the warm lamp a mother leaves by her child's bedside at night. He felt something inside him open, a small yet profound door, where pain, fear, and unanswered questions slowly dissolved like autumn clouds thinning in the sky. From within that light, Abraham saw a group of people walking toward him. They were not glorious heroes or flawless saints, but ordinary faces. An old man leaning slightly to one side, a child with curious eyes, a woman carrying the weight of wounds not yet healed. Yet in all their eyes, there was one shared quality: the quiet perseverance of people who had endured hardship without letting their hearts go dark. They survived not because they were strong, but because they protected a small flame of goodness in a world full of storms. Yahoel said these were the righteous, people life had tried to break, but who rose again with a simple faith, like a seed of rice pushing through the soil after a night of rain. And because they had preserved that little spark, a greater light would return to them. This light did not come to punish or erase the world, but to heal it, to gather the souls who chose goodness, the way a farmer gathers the last golden stalks of rice into an old woven basket. In that moment, Abraham saw a dawn rising. Not a dawn in the sky, but a dawn inside the human heart, when after all the chaos and darkness, light finally finds a place to stand again. He understood that every trial, every sorrow, every desperate question he had witnessed was not meant to drive humanity into despair, but to teach them to cherish the light, when it returned. Abraham bowed his head, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. He knew that from this moment on, the path before him no longer spoke about his life alone, but about a promise given from heaven. A promise that light will always return to those who keep goodness alive in their hearts, even if it flickers like a coal on the verge of fading. And in that realization, Abraham finally understood why heaven had called his name from the very beginning.